No, no problem. Thanks. Thank you for that. Let me repeat what I said. Good morning, everyone, and thank you guys and ladies for joining us for the Sinking Fund Commission meeting uh, on today, September 15th. We have a pretty full agenda, and the first item on the agenda is the approval of the August 2021 transcript. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll make the motion.
Is there a second?
Second it.
A motion has been made and properly seconded regarding the August transcript. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. The next item on the agenda is the review of the actuarial valuation report for the year July 1st, 2021 through June 30th, 2022. I'm going to turn it over to Christopher at this point.
Thanks, Don. Just briefly, this is the annual actuarial review, which is performed by our actuaries at Aon, Al Johnson, Joe Romanis, and their team will walk through the report today that you've been provided with, answer any questions, and address any issues or other items not covered by the report that you'd like to see discussed. So with that, I'll turn it over to Al and his team to start the walkthrough.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Can everybody hear me okay? Just want to make sure my volume is doing all right here.
Yes.
Yes.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. My name is Al Johnson again. Thanks for the introduction, Chris. I have my colleague, Joe Romanis, with us, and together we're going to walk you through the report, the actual evaluation report, which will give an evaluation of the assets and the liabilities of the PGW pension plan as of July 1, 2021, and the cost for the plan in the year July 1, 2021 through June 30th of 2022. So again, as Chris mentioned, stop us anytime with any questions or concerns, and we'll just, we'll go through page by page here. Bill, if you could take us to little Roman numeral 5. I don't know if you can expand it. Yeah, go back up a little bit. The executive summary on the previous page. There we go. Yeah. Okay. So that's where we're going to start. Just a quick highlight, quick overview here. The plan's funded status remained at about 75% as of July 1, 2021. This is based on what we call a smooth actuarial value of assets. So what that is it's not the full market value of assets, but a smoothing over a 5-year period. So we that helps take some of the ups and downs out of the asset value year over year and get a little less volatility that we encounter. The main factors that drove this are one of the big ones is that we dropped the investment return rate from 7.3% to 7% effective July 1, 2021. And that's just, to be a little bit more in line with current capital market assumptions. And they've contracted a bit over the last few years. So we brought the interest rate down in reaction to that. So that was one of the big things. We'll touch on a couple of the other things in the pages to come. Your market value of assets had a tremendous year in the year ending on June 30th of 2021. Again, we don't recognize all of that in that actuarial ratio up there, but we will over time, over the next 5 years, and we'll talk a little bit more about the market value on some of the other pages. We've already had a directive from the city's finance director to continue the $30 million contribution for another year. We've been doing this now for the last couple of years, and it's a bit above the funding policy, but it helps really to more aggressively fund the plan, move the fund to a better funded ratio over time, and that just makes the plan more secure for PGW, for its pensioners, and for rating agencies and and taxpayers, those not taxpayers, but the end users of the natural gas. And then finally, we're on this page. We're seeing, as you know, there's a choice. So when folks come in, they can either elect to go into this defined benefit plan or the PGW defined contribution plan. And right now, we're roughly seeing about a 50-50 split of that. Last year was 56% of the employees went into this plan, and the other 44% went into the defined contribution plan. In the defined contribution plan, PGW makes a 5.5% contribution of their pay. In the PGW plan here, new participants are required to put in a 6% of pay contribution toward the plan. Okay, so that's a quick overview.
Yeah, Al, before you move on.
Sure, Don.
I just want to go back to that second sentence in the executive summary. I just want to make certain I understand it. The ratio is below the 76.76% forecast in 2020.
Right.
The main driver for the ratio not meeting expectations was due to the increase in liability due to the update of the valuation interest rate. So just walk me through what that means.
What that means, Don, is essentially we use that investment return rate to discount and to come up with the liability of the plan. So the higher the discount, basically what it comes down to is the higher that rate is, the lower the liability is to PGW. What that essentially means is we're expecting more money from investment returns, and that puts less burden on PGW. As that rate declines, then we're expecting to earn less investment interest in the future, and that increases the liability on PGW. So basically, all the benefit payments that are made out of this plan come from two sources. It comes from contributions that PGW makes and from investment return. So if the one's lower, the other has to be higher, and vice versa. So if we're bringing down that rate, we're saying that we're not going to earn as much investment interest or investment return, which correspondingly means that there's more liability on PGW. So in other words, that we expect them to have to make higher contributions in the future with a lower rate. Does that make sense?
Yeah. The only thing that was confusing to me is we had an exceptional year of returns.
Right.
Well above I would have thought expectations, but yet we didn't meet the goal. So that's the only reason I raised the question.
And the reason and the reason for that is, Don, the other reason for that is we use this smooth actuarial value of assets. So basically what we do is we take that gigantic market value investment return that we had this year, and we defer 80% of it for the future. So we're not recognizing 80% of that large gain that we had this year. So the actuarial value of assets is going to be much lower than the market value of assets this year. So, and we're going to show on another slide, Don, that while we're looking at a ratio here of about 75%, on a market value basis, it's more like 85%. But that is the method that we use for the assets because, again, you had a great year this year, and it'd be great to realize all that. But what if it was a negative 30% year in the markets? Well, we would be able to defer in the same way 80% of a loss. So it keeps that asset value sort of less volatility year over year. So it's really just for reporting purposes.
Thank you for that explanation. Appreciate it.
Great. If we, Bill, if you could go to page 1 now. Yep. Perfect. Thank you. So here's a snapshot of the participant data as of this valuation date as the prior valuation date. And what you can kind of see here is overall plan is a pretty stable plan year over year. What we are seeing, though, is that decline in the number of active participants. So as folks leave to retire or just leave the company. They're not being replaced one for one right now because obviously some of those folks are going into defined contribution plans. So over time, we're going to see the number of active participants in this plan continue to decline slowly till we reach some sort of a steady state number in the future. The other categories are fairly stable. We don't see any change in the retirees and not much in the terminated vested folks. Those are folks that have left PGW, have a pension benefit, but have not started it yet. Payroll, about a 2.1% increase in line with what we would have expected. And the active employee average age and average service, again, as you can see, fairly stable. This is a large plan, very mature plan. We're generally not seeing large swings in the census data year over year. Okay, if we go to the next page. Okay, now we'll get into some of the costs here. The first line we're showing there is the normal cost. Now, what the normal cost is that is the value of the benefit accruals that are going to occur in the coming plan year. So what we're looking at is about $7.9 million. And if we want to think about that, if the plan was fully funded, that would be the expected contribution to the plan. So the plan would be funding the value of those benefit accruals in the coming year. And you can also look at that as sort of another element of payroll, but instead of being delivered directly, it's delivered through the pension plan. So we had a large increase this year, and this is PGW's portion. We'll see in a later slide that the total normal cost is a bit higher, but this is net of the employee contributions. We had about a 28% increase, driven by, if we want to go down a little further here, and then we'll come back up to the contributions. What sort of drove the changes this year from last year? And if you can get down just a little bit further there, Bill, so we can see there you go, perfect. The interest rate change from 7.3 to 7 increased the actual accrued liability by about 23 million. We expected that. That increases the annual contribution by about 2.3 million or 2.3% of pay. Investment returns, again, we had a very, very big year on a market value basis. So the investment excess return was about $155 million, but we're not recognizing that all this year. As I mentioned, we're only recognizing 20% of that. The other 20% will come in over the next 4 years. But because we did have a really good year, it still resulted in a decrease in the annual contribution on account of that by about 2.1 million or 2.2% of pay. Our open amortization policy right now, the funding policy that's taking hold is the 20-year open policy, and every year we expect that to result, that amortization of the unfunded liability to result in a reduction in the policy contribution, because that'll get smaller as we're paying down that unfunded liability, exclusive of any additional experience gains or losses or changes in assumptions. And the effect of that was about a decrease of 0.4 million or 0.4% of pay in the annual contribution. The demographic changes, we had some, what we saw there was we had some losses on the demographic side through the census data. And that was really driven by, we were seeing more younger employees retiring under the 30 and out provision than we expected through our actuarial assumption, as well as some just some very general evaluation tweaks we made to our programming to be more reflective of historical salaries, sort of improve the whole valuation process. And that, if you could pull that up a little bit farther, Bill. Thank you, that's good. That increased the contribution, the annual contribution, about 1.8 million or 1.8% of pay because of those losses. And then finally, the last thing here is optional form equivalence changes. PGW had been using a very outdated table to convert to different forms of annuity for their retirees when they're going to retire. We updated that this year, effective July 1, 2021, to a contemporary table that reflects current mortality patterns and in line with what we use for the valuation mortality table. But because of that change actually increased the annual contribution about 1.1 million or 1.1% of pay. So those are all the factors that sort of went into that, the change in the contribution rate. If you go back up, Bill, we see there's the contribution. The 20-year contribution is about 26 million. The 30-year is 24.7, and what we're calling the directed contribution, which is from the finance director's office, of about 30 million. So the policy contribution this year would be 26 million. So we're putting in about 4 million more than the policy, and that aggressive funding will only serve to benefit the plan in the future as you build up assets at a quicker pace and increase that funded ratio over time. And we did see those increases in the contribution due to the effect of those changes that we just looked at below. Are there any questions there? Okay, we can go on to the next page. Okay, here's some more general information. Your unfunded accrued liability went up about 7.4%, about 197 million. So again, that is your actuarial value of assets, that smooth value, divided by the plan's liability. The present value of accumulated and vested and accumulated benefits, that really represents the value of all the benefits accrued to date. So in other words, we're not projecting out any future service or salary for plan participants, but it's just based on the service and the salary they have to date. And those are the liabilities there. And you'll see they're not quite as high as the accrued liability, but it's just another measure of, give you more of a snapshot take of what the plan's liability is based on those, everything accumulated to date. If we go down into section 2, development of the actual accrued liability, this shows now, how do we get from point A to point B from last year to this year? Last year, we were at 741 million. We add on that normal cost, which is the value of those benefits accruing last year. Interest cost, which is just the interest on the outstanding liability, and reduce it by the benefit payments that come out of the plan. We would expect the liability to have been about 744 million. Now here's a breakdown dollar-wise of those different factors that we talked about and how they impact the liabilities. The demographic loss was about 16.9 million. So that was that folks retiring earlier than we expected. The discount rate, that's the change from the 7.3 to the 7%. So that increased liability is about 23 million. So it's a pretty big hit. You can see there, that's a material increase in liabilities on account of that change. And then the optional form equivalence factors was about 8 million. So not as big as the others, but still contributing to the loss there. And the actual liability at July 1, 2021 comes out to be 792 million when factoring in those changes.
Hi, Al. Bill, can you go back to that page for a second?
Hey, Fran.
Hi, Al. How you doing?
Good.
Under 2B, where it says interest costs.
Yep.
Is that amortization? Is that interchangeable with that?
No. Yeah, what that is, Fran, is basically, it's almost like a financing cost. It's basically the interest rate multiplied by the liability at July 1, 2020, the 741 million. So if you took the 741 million and multiplied it by 7.3%, you get roughly that 52 million. So it's really like a carrying cost is what it is. So you have a liability and it's almost like a loan, and that's the loan interest payment.
So that would not be the same as an amortization?
No. Nope. This is just the change in the liability from last year to this year. The amortization Fran, really more affects the contributions.
Okay.
And we'll see that on some pages as we go forward. You'll see where the amortization piece comes in.
The reason I was asking that question is, and I'm not asking you to comment on the municipal fund, but the municipal fund's normal cost is only 10.26% with a lot lower funding level and a lot more liabilities. Why is the normal cost here 28.1%?
I don't think it's 28.1. If you go back up, can you go back up to the previous slide, Bill?
On page 2, it says percent was that 28.1% change? Was that a change?
So that's a change from the prior year.
It increased by 28.1 because of more people retiring. Is that it?
No, that really increased because of the change in the discount rate from 7.3 to 7, Fran. That was the major driver of it. Plus those other things, that optional form equivalence factor change that we made,
Yep.
as well as those demographic losses. That all gets baked into that number.
Okay.
So if you go up a little higher, no, I guess it's good. Yeah, if you go down at 28, I think the normal cost is about, I think it's in here somewhere, Fran.
I think it's 7.8, right? It went up
That
from
seems reasonable.
6.1 to 7.8. That's a
Yeah.
28% increase. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I got it, Al. Now you answered
Yeah.
the question. Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
No problem. Go ahead. Thanks for stopping. I mean, I'd like to make this a little discussionary as well. Is this okay? So we're on. Bill, could you just run up real quick to the previous page? Did we get through everything there? I think we did, right? Yeah, we did. Okay. So we'll go on to the next page. Here is a summary of your asset values last year and this year. And obviously the noticeable thing there is the increase in the market value. It's 24% higher than last year, where the actuarial value is only 6.7% higher. And this is due to that smoothing. This is really where you can see the impact of the smoothing. The separation there at 2021 has gotten much larger than it was in the prior year. In fact, it's even flipped. The actuarial value was larger last year. The tremendous return that we had this year, close to 30%, really drove that market value higher. But again, we're only recognizing 20% of that gain in the actuarial value of assets. So it's sort of bad when you have really good years, but it's good when you have really bad years. And you don't recognize that big reduction in the market value in any one year.
Al, do we know the 5-year, the returns of the other 4 years?
We do, but I don't have them in this report. I mean, I could provide that after in a separate exhibit for you. You mean the rates of return in the prior 5 years?
Well, I want to see the 80%, 60%, 40%, 20%. I just want to see what years we recognize and what percentage.
We do, Fran. That's going to be coming up on a subsequent slide. So we'll go through that. Yeah. Okay, so you can move to the next slide. This is some of the discussion we sort of had. It's just the changes in the demographics, as well as the 30 million contribution. So there's really not a lot on this page to talk about. So we can probably move to the next page. Here's a reconciliation now of your market value of assets from last year to this year. And the number to really, to point out here is the 155.8 million. That was your investment return in the year ending on July 1, 2021. Your benefit payments were about 56 million. So your net cash flow is a little bit negative. If we're looking at employer contributions less the disbursements, you're slightly negative, but not in a big fashion there. And there is, the reconciliation leads to the 673.5 million in plan assets as of July 1 of 2020. So really just a tremendous jump in the market value over 1 year. There's your current asset allocation. your target allocation. I'm sure those have got a little bit, the equities have come in a little bit higher just because of that, the tremendous surge that we had over the last year in the equity markets. And your rate of return.
Al, I just want to point out that this actually is not the target allocation. In fact, there's a presentation coming up today. I think 7.5% is now, as of last year's agreement to change the asset allocation, 7.5% is now dedicated to alternatives.
Okay.
So the target actual allocation is this, but the target allocation is not this.
So we'll update that, Fran. We'll get that from PFM or from
Okay.
Chris, and we can make an adjustment to that. I haven't signed the report yet because I like to go through this with the commission first and see if there's any tweaks that we need to make before we sign off on it.
Yeah.
So we can make that adjustment to the report.
All right, great. Yeah, that was October 2019. The asset allocation was presented by PFM to the board.
Okay. So we can clarify that and make that a little bit better in our final signed version.
Yeah, just because I want the
Yeah.
document just to be accurate.
Yes.
It's not a big deal. I just want to make sure it's accurate for whoever reviews it.
Yep. And I can get that. Like I say, I'll get that from Chris.
Thank you.
Again, rate of return was, close to 30%. So it was it was just a great year. Not much. You don't often see a 30% rate of return. So we'll take it, right? Okay, we can go to the next page, Bill. That's good. Okay, now, Fran, here's the development of the actuarial value of assets. So we have last year's market value. We have an expected market value and then the actual. So the difference between the expected and the actual is the gain for the year. And that was about 117 million, which you can see on that top line there. Okay, so that was the full gain. Here is the remainder, sort of, or the initial basis over the last. So we had a down year in for higher year and a down year, and then we had an up year. The unrecognized portions of those gains and losses is shown down below here, starting with the 93 million. So of the 117 million, we're only recognizing 20% of that, and we're deferring 80% with this 93 million. These others are 80, 60, 40, and 20%. So those are winding down. We're working those out. Bases get dropped off, and then new unrecognized bases are added. So the preliminary actuarial value is essentially the market value less these deferred gains and losses. So it brings us down from the 673 to the 595 number. Okay, so the sum of those four numbers, 93, -15, 1.8, and 1.4 positive, that subtracted off the market value of assets gives us our actuarial value of assets. But there's constraints on how much that can be different than the market value, and it's at 20% around the market value. So the actuarial value can't be less than 80% nor more than 120% of the market value. But you can see we're kind of down near more towards the 80% range, and that was because we did have that large gain last year. So the final value is the same as the preliminary value since we were in the corridor. Okay. So Fran, that's those bases you were talking about, how we're recognizing them over a 5-year period.
Yeah, I'll have Chris communicate with you offline now, because what I would like to see is columns with fiscal year ending, whatever year it is, investment gain and loss, percent recognized, percent deferred, and amount deferred. It's just a very simple chronology in order to follow it, and Chris can communicate that to you.
Okay, so we'll adjust that exhibit to be a little bit more illustrative of how we arrive at that number, rather than just having those simple bases. So that sounds good to me, Fran. No problem with that. We'll work with, again, we'll make those changes and we'll send out another draft just to get your approval before we, it's always good to be continually refining the reports to make them better and more understandable to the readers. This page is a sort of a demonstration of what the full value of the projected benefits are. So the first line just is the number of folks in each category. Line 2 is projected annual benefits. So for terminated, vested, and retired, that is just the benefit that they're receiving now or they're going to receive in the future. For the actives, the projected annual benefits represent the projection of salary and service from July 1, 2021 to their retirement date. And those are the projected benefits at retirement date for the active employees. So not just things they've accrued to date, but what we project that they'll earn when they go to retire in the future. The present value of each of those numbers is shown on line 3. So you can see the present value of all future benefits is about $902 million. Okay. Our accrued liability is only $792. And the difference between those two numbers is the present value of all those future benefit accruals. So it's the present value of all the future salary and service that participants will earn. And again, for the retirees and the terminated vested, they're not earning anything additional in the future. It's just the actives. So that's what that 109 represents. Is we have a normal cost of about $8 million. It's the present value of all those future normal costs brought back to today. And the difference between those two is your accrued liability that you recognize sort of on the books, which is the $792 million. We have our actuarial value of assets, leaving your unfunded actuarial accrued liability of about $197 million. There's the normal cost of 9.4. That's the total normal cost. So that's the total value of the benefits that are going to accrue in the 2021-2022 plan year. Employees are going to pay for part of those accruals, about $1.5 million, leaving PGW's obligation at about $7.9 million, which is what we saw on the earlier slides, on the earlier pages. Okay, and now on this page, we're showing a breakdown of the policy contribution. So the policy contribution is the normal cost, value of benefits accruing this year, plus an amortization of the unfunded liability. So we're amortizing the unfunded liability in two different ways here. One way is we're just taking the unfunded liability each year and we're amortizing it over a period of 20 years. And that results in a payment of about $17.3 million. And when added to the normal cost, gives us $25.2 million. And then the contribution at different points in the year is just adjusted by interest. So that is the one schedule. That's one. The other is the what we call the 30-year closed amortization period. So there's our normal cost again. And each year we develop a new slice of liability, which is basically a balancing number to get, all these unamortized amounts, less what we have currently as our unfunded liability. And that we get $16.5 million. And we amortize that over a period of 30 years. And so every year we add a new base, and eventually we'll have 30 bases in there. If this runs for a long enough period of time, we add those up, we get an annual amortization payment of $16 million. Adding those two together, we get to 23.9, and then adjusted for the payment differentials in payment time during the year. So that's the two ways in which we calculate our policy contribution, and our policy contribution is the greater of those two contribution amounts. So right now, the 20-year amortization is still greater than the 30-year close, and that ends up being what the policy contribution is for the year. Eventually, over time, if gains and losses don't occur in the future, it'll switch around. The 20-year will become less, and the 30-year will become more, and that would be the policy contribution. So right now we're funding $30 million. Any questions on the development of the policy contributions? Okay, if we can go to the next page then. Thanks, Bill. Here is just a graphical illustration of the different components of the contribution. The light blue is the amortization payment. The red is the normal cost. And then the green is that little interest adjustment for payment at different time points in the year. So not a great deal of difference between the two, but the 20-year is still larger. Okay, I think you can move to the next page. And this page shows a little bit of a different liability. It's not really used in our calculations of cost and unfunded liability and funded ratios. But what it is, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, this is the present value of benefits that have been accrued to date by all of the participants in the plan. So the retirees and the terminated vested folks, we know their benefits, they're not changing. For the actives, it's everything that they have accrued up to 7/1/2021. There's no projection of salary and service beyond the valuation date. So it's more of a snapshot of, hey, where are we right now? Not taking into account any of those future salary or service expectations. And if you move down a little bit on the page, you have the total present value is about $749 million. And we're comparing this to the market value of assets because this ASC 960 is really used for the trust audited financial statements. And ASC 960 requires the use of market value of assets, not actuarial value of assets in this exhibit. And that shows you that on an accrued basis, the plan is about 75.4 million unfunded, which is a lot less than 197 million on the actuarial value of asset basis and the accrued liability basis. So this is more of a snapshot of where's the plan today, and it's really in quite good shape at only a deficiency of only 75 million. Okay. At this point, I'm going to turn the discussion over to my colleague, Joe Romanis, who is going to take us the rest of the way through the report.
Great. Thanks, Al. So I'll pick up on PDF page 19. We show the expected 10-year payout of benefits to participants over the next 10 years. So you'll see, looking in the first column, for this upcoming year, so the plan year starting July 1st, 2021, expect payouts to retirees to be about $59 million. And you see that growing a little bit each year, growing at the end of the 10-year period, expected to be about the $63,874,000. We also show a kind of a reconciliation there of different components that might go into paying out those benefits. So what's coming into the plan assets. So we do show expected contributions for the year coming from PGW as well as from employee contributions. And the final component is the remaining amount that would be paid out. We state being paid out from the plan assets. So for the first year, the PGW contributions of 30 million, plus the employee contributions of 1.7 million, plus the remaining 27.4 million would get you to the expected payouts for the year. I'll mention, so this doesn't include what would be expected investment returns from the plan assets. And so for this coming year, based on an investment return of 7% assumption, we would expect that to be about $46 million.
In previous years, was that 30 million a higher number?
The contributions to the plan, I believe 30 million is the highest it has been. So that's the directed amount. It was the same amount the year before. And in historical years, it was lower amounts. I think if we go on to the next slide, we have a history of those amounts. Actually, sorry, one more page. And here we do show what the calculated contributions had been in prior years, and before 2020. So 2020 was the start of the higher directed contribution, but before that, you can see the calculated contributions.
Yeah, Don, it was last year that I remember that was the first year that Rob, the finance director, agreed based on our analysis to go to $30 million for the contribution. So it seemed to make sense. And he has agreed to that again for the upcoming year. So it's 2 years in a row.
Thank you.
All right, so moving on to the PDF, page 20. Here we show a historical progression of funding for the plan. I'll note this is based on the market value of assets rather than that smooth value. So if you look at the final line, you'll see the market value of assets reflecting the actual plan balance on July 1st, 2021 of the 673 million, gets to an 85% funded ratio. So here you'll see that notable increase when we're reflecting all of the investment gains during the past year.
I just want to make sure that's the market value, right? That is not the actuarial value.
That's correct. So this is the market value of assets.
Right, which, okay.
Yeah, on to PDF page 21, Exhibit I, we show a historical recollection of the contribution calculations under both of the methods that are considered. So the first one being the 20-year open amortization. And you'll see a similar layout to what Al had gone over for the current year, but historically over the past number of years, we show the unfunded actuarial accrued liability, what that results into an amortization payment, the corresponding normal cost and employee contributions, and then what that would equate to for a mid-year contribution. So the top half is the 20-year open amortization method. The bottom is the 30-year closed amortization method. And what we'll see as we compare the two, historically, the 20-year open has always been higher. And as time goes on, we would anticipate those two switch over, where in a number of years, currently we have it at 2024, the 30-year closed would become higher than the 20-year open method.
I believe this was explained last year, but unfortunately, I don't remember. Why was the larger reduction between 2019 and 2020 in the UAL? See the big decreases, 2019 to 2020, much larger than the other years.
I do.
You explain that?
Do you recall off the top of your head what we had there?
Yeah, Fran, I think we had talked about that last year, and I don't have a recollection of what that was. There was something there which we can take a look at and then send you an email.
Yeah, that makes two of us because I believe we discussed it. I don't remember. So, yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, we'll do that.
All right, so moving on to next, so we show essentially a graphical representation of the prior page. So the blue bar is reflecting the historical calculation of the 20-year open amortization method, green being the 30-year closed. And you can see a comparison there. So as we mentioned, back in 2015, when they were first compared, a larger difference than there is, that difference is closing over time. And in a few years, we anticipate the 30-year close to exceed the 20-year open. All right, then on PDF page 23, we do a forward-looking projection. So I'll mention here, this is showing the smooth value of assets or the actuarial value. So the funded ratio, if you look on, in the graph on the very left-hand side, that's 75.1% is reflecting that actuarial value. So the lower funded ratio compared to the market value of assets. But a notable pattern you'll see as that large investment gain from the past year is reflected in over the next 4 or 5 years. You notice a larger jump those next few years as that's factored in, with the increase in the funded ratio then leveling off a little bit more as we anticipate no gains or losses for the plan.
And these projections are all based on the 65-35 portfolio, not with any alternative investments, correct?
So these are based on an investment return of 7%.
I see what the assumption is at the bottom, but the 7% is simply. Was there any testing of what the 65-35 returns are projected to be going forward, or is this just simply plugging in the assumed rate of return?
Yeah, we had to utilize the plan's assumed rate of return at 7%.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Joe, just to follow up on that, so there's no volatility here, right? These aren't stochastic. This is just deterministic. Yeah,
that's correct. Yeah,
I think in the past you all have run those kinds of stress tests for us. Would that be possible to include in this as an exhibit, just with a sort of 7 with some sort of standard deviation, and then maybe doing, what would happen if it was 6.8, just for comparison for sake?
Sure. Yeah, no, we've run scenarios in the past. So is that one you want to look at a 6.8% return?
Yeah, well, I'm sort of getting at, I guess, Fran's question of I don't know if PFM has looked at what they say the expected return would be, and then I don't know what a reasonable sort of deviation from that would be. I don't know if that's something that you guys discussed.
I'll speak up. That is part of the asset allocation analysis we prepared last year. We could do it again this year under our new capital market assumptions or early next year. I think last year the result was somewhere around 7.3% for the median return.
Okay.
So the asset allocation has probabilities of meeting a 7 or 7.3% return. I won't review those probabilities now because they're part of the asset allocation. But I think what Nick is saying is that not that I need to speak for Nick, but what I would like to see is stress testing being part of the annual actuarial review. And it could be various scenarios, failing to meet the assumed rate by 50 basis points or 100 basis points, exceeding the assumed rate of return by 50 or 100 basis points, some type of variation where the projections would be a little more realistic, I guess is the word.
Yeah. And hey, Fran, it's Al. We've done those in separate exhibits a number of times over the last few years, so we certainly can do that again. We've generally done that as and presented that as a PowerPoint deck with different, again, if there was a 30% correction one year and then we go back to normal, just various scenarios.
Yeah, you understand it, Al. You're exactly right. And why don't Chris, maybe Chris could send you some various scenarios that we're familiar with that maybe we can incorporate annually into the asset allocation along with the consultant, of course. Right.
Yeah, that would not be a problem at all. We could actually just provide that as a separate, sort of a separate document with the VAL, sort of accompanying the VAL report, the valuation report.
Yeah, does that make sense, Nick?
Yeah, thanks, Fran. That's exactly what I had in mind.
Yeah, because I know Rebecca's asked for that, many times over the last, and we're happy to do it. It does, it does give you more of a picture of, and we're certainly capable of doing full stochastic type projections as well. You know, the various stress tests are just, you know, single tests, single deterministic tests. It's not really looking at the whole, 5,000 different possible scenarios, but it certainly gives you some idea of the sensitivity of the liabilities and the costs of the plan for these. And we can even gather up, Fran, I don't know if you have them, some of the ones we've did in the past, at least just get you down. We could send you those if you don't have those in your files, the ones we've done.
I have them, Al. I think.
No, you do. Okay.
I think it's more of just formalizing it into
do it every year.
Asset allocation. Yeah.
Okay.
Don, is that okay with you, Don? Does that make sense?
That does.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, this just shows you one scenario if we meet all the actuarial assumptions.
Yep.
So it's really, you have to take it for what it's worth. We hope our assumptions are fairly good and we think it's a good baseline case, but the chances of actually hitting that are close to zero, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we're never going to hit our assumptions exactly. So
the controller has worked to help formalize stress testing in the municipal fund, and I think formalizing it here would be helpful, and I think Chris knows what we're looking for, so he can work.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Thanks, guys.
Fran, just to that point, and Nick, I had spoken to Al and Joe last week. I had anticipated that this was something that folks were going to want to see, the stress test. It's one, and I had mentioned that to them, and that's one of the other reasons why it's listed as a draft report, because I thought folks would want to see that. Those various tests. I think Nick and I talked about that a little bit yesterday. Before you guys and ladies accepted the report. So yeah, I'm happy to work with Aon on that and get you something. Certainly before the next meeting.
Thank you.
Sounds good with us.
All right. So I think continuing on then with the draft report in front of us. So moving to the next slide. It'll be PDF slide 24. Yeah, we have a few pages detailing participant census information. So PDF page 24 first shows information for those participants who are currently receiving benefits. So if you scroll down a little bit, first we show a breakdown of counts by age, as well as how long they have been receiving benefits. And I'll point out the average age of a retiree is 71, and average person has been receiving payments for not quite 13 years, 12.67 years. A little further down, we show information for those who are vested terminated, or those who are no longer actively employed but have not yet started their pension payments. You can see there are 309 of those individuals. Moving on to the next page, we show information for the actively employed participants. So here it's information broken out by years of service and the individual's age. I'll note that for confidentiality purposes, any groups that have less than 20 individuals, we've omitted the earnings in those groups. Just because if there's a few individuals there, it could be, if someone's age in service, it'd be easy to identify that. So for confidentiality purposes. So if you scroll down a little bit, even a little bit more, we'll see at the bottom, average age of active participant is just over 44 years old, with the average service being 14.63 years. Any questions on either of those? All right, moving to the next page. So the PDF page 26, a graphical representation there of active headcount. So you can see the number of participants, of actively employed participants by years of service. As you might expect, generally a pattern of decreasing counts as you get into higher years of service. All right, moving to the next page. Show a reconciliation of the counts under each of the categories. You'll see the overall number of plan participants decrease from 3,677 down to 3,620. The number of retirees remain the same. It's the active individuals where we generally saw a decrease in the number of counts from last year to this year. And that's to be expected as new participants coming into the plan have the option to now participate in the defined benefit pension plan or the 401k plan. Generally, we've seen about a 50-50 split where half participants are choosing the defined benefit plan with the other half choosing the 401k plan. So as that kind of develops over time, we do expect the active counts to decrease a little bit until that balances out, finds an equilibrium. All right, moving to the next page. We go through the plan's assumptions and methods. So on PDF page 28, an overview of the cost method used. We use the projected unit credit cost method in determining the plan's liabilities. And under number 2, some details on the asset smoothing technique used. So Al had communicated earlier. That's a smooth period over 5 years, as well as limited to fall within 80 to 120% of the market value of assets. All right, moving to the next page. More details on the assumptions used for developing the liabilities of the plan. So the mortality tables used are the latest and greatest from the Society of Actuaries, called the pre-2012 mortality table, and those are projected forward generationally using the scale MP 2020. I'll note the interest rate, which was lowered from last year down to 7% this year, as well as information on the turnover, disability, salary information. I'll note those were updated in last year's evaluation as a result of an experience study that we had performed last year. Next page details the assumed retirement ages, as well as salary information and assumptions for conversion of time off balances as participants go into retirement status and convert many unpaid or time off days conversion into a salary. And I'll note those assumptions as well had been updated with the experience study last year. So this is the second year those are reflected. Next few pages really go into detail of the termination assumptions. So large page with a good amount of numbers and percentages, as well as the disability rates assumed for participants. Some salary increases, which do adjust based on years of participant service. So generally lower tenured employees are assumed to have a higher annual pay increase compared to more senior individuals. And then rounding out the report, a few pages on a summary of the plan provisions. And I think that wraps up the draft funding report. I think I'll open it up. Any questions on what Al and I went through today?
I don't have a question, but could someone just share with us the follow-up matters we agreed on?
Yeah, Don, so I wrote down, we're gonna get back to the group on the drop in the unfunded accrued liability that occurred in 2018. We're going to draft up a new schedule for the actuarial value of assets that Fran had mentioned. We're going to change the asset allocation once we talk a little to Chris. We just want to make sure we get that right. We'll get that exactly in line with what the current targets are, and then we're going to do. We'll formulate some stress testing scenarios with Chris and maybe Nick as well. Whatever, and then we'll put that together as a separate document. Again, I think what we're going to do is we'll issue, Chris, I'll send you, once we get the AVA schedule, the asset schedule and the new asset allocation, I think we'll issue another draft report. I just want to make sure everybody's comfortable with it before we go ahead and sign it. So we'll get that out. And then once everybody says, yes, this looks good, then we'll put our signatures on it and finalize it. How did that cover everything? I think I captured most of the stuff.
And just for the commissioner's benefit, the IPS, the investment policy statement that was amended in 2019, it does have a requirement that the consultant perform an annual portfolio stress test. Yeah, I think given the discussion today, it might be advisable to add the actuary to that requirement. So I can add that. It's a fairly simple change. I could add that to the next agenda, so we're in line with the Sunshine Act requirements, but we could just add a sentence formalizing that the actuary should do that as well.
Are there any other questions? Christopher, a question. Once we receive the final report, do the commissioners have to formally accept that report, or there's no action required?
I'd have to go back and look at the transcripts from prior years, Don. I don't recall the commissioners taking a formal vote to accept it. I think it's left in draft form until, all the commissioner questions, changes get made. But I will verify that for everyone prior to the next meeting. But that's my recollection offhand. I don't recall folks voting to accept it in prior years, but I will double check that.
Okay, thank you very much. So, gentlemen, we thank you for your presentation.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So can we move on to the next item on the agenda? And I don't have the agenda in front of me. So what is the next item?
The private debt discussion.
All right.
Chris, do you need us to stay on the call, or should we drop now?
It's up to you. It's a public meeting. You're not required to
Okay.
stay. You certainly can if you want, but
Okay.
no requirement that you do so.
Okay, thanks.
So this is Alex. I unfortunately have to depart in about 20 minutes. So Chris, I don't know if you want to jump into this or toss any questions. I know that, Golub has presented, the last meeting, and there were some follow-ups. So I can jump into that, or I don't know if you want to get started first.
So sure. I just, I've discussed to varying degrees with all three of the commissioners or their designees some outstanding questions about Golub. Several revolve around DE&I and the employment demographics, as well as what leverage, or what can be done to impress upon the manager to the need or our desire to see those numbers improve going forward. And then I also know Don, both intra-meeting and I believe at the last meeting, raised some questions with respect to LIBOR and the interest rate, default rates, et cetera. Just that's a high summary, Don. I know I didn't hit everything you asked, but just generally. So I think, Alex, perhaps if you want to start with those questions, and then Kellen, Don, Fran, et cetera, may have other things they want to discuss with you.
Yep, thanks. So on the screen, you can bring that back up, Bill. On the screen, you see the demographic info, and this was requested to be further broken down from just the top level minority category, which, as you know, that's how the city's policy is written, and that's how most firms track their data. But it was very accommodating of them to get this granular for us. I don't think it raises any red flags, and is encouraging in the sense that it does show a diverse spectrum. Previously their statements to what they've have done in the past, more importantly, what they continue or what they expect to continue to do as the labor market evolves, the diverse labor market evolves, indicates a commitment to this. And so we don't have any issues with the actions they've taken and the actions they've stated that they plan to take. And so I don't, from PFM's view, this is not an issue with approval.
I mean, I would say, sure, it might not be a red flag where, we would say absolutely don't go with them. But to me, it's a massive yellow flag if, there were 0 African Americans at the senior investment level and only 5% sort of firm wide, right? And I think that, I don't know what sort of leverage we have here, but like I would hope that in the years to come, we see meaningful progress towards diversifying. I mean, I know from the municipal pension side, like we work really hard to sort of push people to increase diversity, and when they don't make progress towards a goal, like I can say that, like, look, I understand that they might not have focused on it in the past and now want to, and that's great, but if they don't make meaningful steps towards that, when we're a city that's majority minority, we should put our money where our mouth is, and we talk a lot about diversity as a city. So I think it's just something to definitely keep an eye on, and have serious discussions with them about, like, what's your plan, how are you going to progress, and we expect to see progress over a relatively short period of time.
Yeah, Kellen, I agree with you, and it's something that you all as trustees are in a position to do. And one way is to lean on the firms with you are invested. In terms of the specifics about African Americans, one way to accomplish that, and something that we all know what the demographics of the city of Philadelphia look like. It's a very diverse city, but it is an African American city. One way to do that is to directly address that in the policy. We know that many investment firms lump all minorities under one group, while not directly tackling the inequities that exist in the country. So one thing that we can work with you all on is to modernize that policy, to get to make it commensurate with the current goals of the trustees and the city of Philadelphia, and also to continue to lean on these managers that understand that they may not get a second commitment or not, get to work with the larger pension fund if nothing beyond this initial, this start, a good start, is not improved upon.
Can someone help me interpret this chart? Can someone show me where the percentage of senior level African American employees are?
I think it's up at the top.
That is it. I'm sorry, is it 0?
I think if you go up.
Calvin, is that what you were referring to?
Yeah, it's 0.
Yeah, no, that's
0.
Not only does it raise a red flag, Alex, it raises multiple red flags. I mean, it's 0. It's not 5%. It's not 10%. It's 0. And that's, I was wondering why the chart up top showed people of color and women. And I suspected that this number was probably not a good number, given that this was the first chart put forward. I think it does raise concerns, and I'm glad that Don asked the question last week or last meeting about providing this information. And I understand what you're saying about our investment policy, but I am not going to say the lack of words in our investment policy is somehow partly, and I don't know if you're saying this, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but partly responsible for these firms not being diverse. So I don't want to get lost in that. Certainly, we would love to bolster our investment policy if it's going to increase diversity, but I don't want to mix the issues here. I agree with, well, I don't agree with Calvin. I agree with Calvin partly that it's at least a yellow flag. I believe it's a red flag. I mean, we're 0%.
Yeah, I mean, Fran, I think what you're seeing partly is the result of, the last several years of, minority, women-owned, disadvantaged business enterprise opportunities have grown. But again, they're somewhat broad.
No, I get that, Alex. I've been at this for 11 years with the municipal fund, and our numbers have grown dramatically over that time. Not due to me, but due to the efforts of the board, and due to various efforts we have made. And it's certainly something that's doable. And yeah, 0% is concerning to me. I'll speak for myself. 0% is concerning.
We have seen the various terminology that large corporations, large partnerships apply to diversity and inclusion. And you really do have to look behind the numbers. And I'm not going to deal in red and green and amber, but I am going to say that this is very alarming for me to see this information. Now, what I don't know, and I do recall in the presentation, and I may use the wrong terminology, but they had a person make a presentation who headed up diversity and inclusion. Am I correct on that?
Yes, they did.
Okay. Now, what I don't know, and what would be interesting to me, is what their outlook, what their plan, and what their expectations are to further diversify the various levels of their organization. And I was thinking on this last night, and Christopher, thank you for getting me that information. I lost a whole lot of sleep last night reflecting on it. But what position should I recommend that we take in light of these numbers? And I thought that the appropriate thing to do would be to re-engage their diversity czar to find out how much progress they've made since he came on board and what their expectations are over the next 3 to 5 years. And then, Alex, I think it's very important for you and for PFM to understand the importance that we're placing. I think the importance that the commissioners are placing on doing business with firms that have a diverse a commitment to diversity and inclusion. And if we don't see that in the candidates, then maybe we don't need to look at those candidates. So that's kind of my thought process on this. I'm not saying no to these guys, but I would like to know where they intend to go in terms of improving the diversity in their organization.
No, I certainly understand the importance, Don. That's not lost on me by any means, and PFM understands it. We can certainly go back to their D&I executive and continue to ask. One of the big steps that weighed on us was their statement to beginning to look beyond the investment banks, the traditional source of recruitment, but to more commercial banks, community banks, the larger community banks, and some of the corporate banks. The traditional lenders that don't recruit out of Ivy League schools exclusively, for example, or something like that. That was one of the big steps that resonated with us in terms of a meaningful, real step. Beyond creating discussion committees, etc. That those are important as well to facilitate a culture that retains people, doesn't chew them up and spit them out. But you've got to find a diverse pool of qualified candidates. And that was an element they said, would they be looking at the next hiring cycle? So, I don't know if it's taken effect yet, but, it showed a step in what I view is as, a real right direction, not just for the firm, but for, this segment of the industry, private equity and private debt.
So what would would the commissioners be agreeable that we have a discussion with the D&I representatives just to get a better sense as to the direction that these guys are moving in? And maybe that's inappropriate. I don't know, but that's kind of the way I feel about it.
No. I think, Don, I think it's appropriate to table the investment pending bringing in their diversity person and maybe a high-ranking executive to talk frankly about this issue and to see what their concrete plan is going forward. Not giving us aspirational type of language, but concrete plans going forward. We have done this in other places, and we have gotten commitments to recruit at local and HBCU universities to bring in people and actually start internship programs at their investment company, which have now started to bring in diverse, specifically African-American investment professionals. So I think, yes, I would make a motion to defer this, go to table it pending the diversity person and a high-ranking executive from GoLob to come in and explain to us and lay out a specific concrete plan for increasing the percentage of African-American investment professionals in the firm.
I would second that motion.
A motion has been made and properly seconded. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That motion is passed. Fran, you just put something on the table that I did not know. So maybe at some point we need to have a discussion on that. And that is the fact that we have had discussions with other major firms about the need to be clearer in terms of their diversity strategy. So let's talk about that at a later
Yeah,
point.
Don, I'd be glad to do that. And I think all the commissioners on this meeting, including Chris, are very, very familiar with doing that. And we have had very good success within the municipal plan with doing that.
The other point that I would make in terms of the recommendation that we just made is I think you're right on target in terms of making certain, in addition to the D&I guy, that we have a very senior corporate official attend these meetings so that they can understand that we're serious about it. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
And Don, just to be fair, Nick was the one who sliced and, they had provided the data, but he was kind enough to share his kind of slicing and dicing it with me last night, and that's what I sent to you. I thanked him, but I'll thank him, on the record for drilling down a little bit further and sharing that with everyone.
Yeah, Nick, you did cause me to stay up late last night after I read this.
I do apologize about that.
No, thank you, Nick. That's good work. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it was very helpful. So thank you again for doing that.
Don, welcome to our world. Nick always sends us data that he broke down, and then we're up all night trying to figure out what it all means.
I try my best. Thanks, guys.
And it may be something that we'd like PFM to share with potential partners with us. This is the type of information that we want to see.
Yeah, to that
All
point,
right, so-
to that point, Don, I'm pretty clear when I meet with managers that I expect to see the data in a certain way, knowing what you and Rebecca, Rob, Fran, Kellen, et cetera, are going to want to see. One other thing I talked to Kellen about briefly this morning that I think would be helpful just in terms of leverage and getting firms to improve their behavior is recognizing that while we invest in their world a relatively small amount of assets, the consultants and folks we work with, whether it's on a discretionary or general consulting basis, work with these firms a lot more. So if the firms, whether it's Golub or anyone else, know that PFM, whoever we're working with, places great importance on this, I think that only adds to the leverage that we have as a commission over these firms. So I would just add that Kellen and I discussed that briefly. I think Fran knows that that's something the board, the Muni Fund, discusses with Marquette. So I just wanted to add that on the record.
Thank you.
All right, I have to take off. Donna, we have responses to your other questions. We can forward that information as well, but it sounds like we'll be at this for some more time. So we'll reach out to Golub and interface with them and come back to you. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
And Floyd, I think you're going to walk us through the investment report.
Yes, I can walk you through the investment report. Just real quickly, just want to point out a couple things. You'll notice for the 1 month, so for August, we were able to outperform the benchmark. If you think about it, where we were able to outperform the benchmark, you'll notice that it's in a couple places. You'll notice that in large cap, we did really well in. Why? You'll notice that PineBridge actually came back during this year over a quarter-to-quarter basis. It's done well over, and if you're looking at it on a year-to-date basis, PineBridge has also done well. From there, small caps, we unfortunately underperformed the benchmark. Where did that come from? That underperformance unfortunately came from a majority you see it with Copeland. Copeland underperformed the benchmark, during the month. The one thing that, has hindered them and probably hindered a lot of others is that you start to see a rotation within the market as less those value type of companies were in favor and or vogue. You've seen growth become a little bit more in favor. You've seen people really go after some of those names that had been beaten down during that first half of the year. You saw that during August, and that's essentially popped up within their returns. Also within here, you're right on top of the benchmark for international equity, which is a really good thing. You'll notice one thing within here is that Acadian did very well. Unfortunately, Ernest Partners and Rumline dragged a little bit. Rumline, that really could be just because of a couple of their, some of their positioning within there. And for Ernest Partners, Ernest, you'll notice that they have done well for the quarter, even have done very well for year-to-date time period. Just one of those things to where, they just have a quick bump in the road, but, still good performance from them. Before I go into fixed income, any questions about equities as a whole? All right, can we scroll down one page? Now this brings us into fixed income. Fixed income, you'll notice that we're basically right on top of the blended benchmark also, which is slightly ahead of the Barclays aggregate over a 1 month time period. Looking at it from a quarter to date time period, 1 quarter, we actually are, lagging a little bit. When you see that lagging, where is that really coming from? It's coming from Garcia Hamilton. Garcia Hamilton, they've been, they were slightly behind the benchmark within that June and July time periods, which also showed up. They did a little bit better within August, which you see here. You'll also notice year to date, they are behind. So that's been unfortunately a headwind for them currently based off of that. Also their duration, they've been a little bit longer in duration, which has been punished versus being shorter. Outside of that, your fixed income, if you kind of take those guys out of it, your fixed income has been pretty decent across the board. You have a couple that, are right around their benchmarks over a year to date time period. You have MetLife, which is the investment grade, which is beating the benchmark, and along with beating its respective benchmark, is actually beating the Barclays aggregate and the blended benchmark, which really helps you out a lot over that time period. Last but not least, the high yield allocation within Sky Harbor, that has really been helpful during this time period, as people have really rushed to find quote unquote yield. This is where they've gone. They've also had really good selection within high yield, which has allowed them to outperform. So you've benefited from number one, having that exposure to high yield, and two, that manager doing significantly better than their benchmark. This will just give you a quick thank you. This will give you a quick update over, your weights, your allocations. You'll notice that, you do see that change as December 2016. At the bottom, there should be another page which should also highlight some changes. Okay, it's not. So your benchmark change should come up in there when we talk about adding in the alternatives and things such as that nature. So be on the lookout for that allocation mandate change, which should be coming up soon. But thank you. I know that was a very hard conversation to have, but that's the conversation that as clients that you should have with us. You should be voicing what are you looking for, and making sure that we're providing you exactly what you're looking for. Because if we're not, then we're not doing exactly what you hired us for. So thank you for that constructive criticism.
Floyd, I wanted to ask, thank you for your presentation. I wanted to ask, when you look forward, and I know there's some concern out there regarding inflation. I'm not sure what impact the Afghanistan has, but what's your forecast in terms of the market over the next 6 months? Is it pretty steady? I mean, what are your thoughts?
Actually, it's not pretty steady. We're looking at that as, for the next couple of months, our expectations that the market, which has done very well during the first 3 quarters of the year, will actually start to moderate and probably subside. You're seeing that currently within the last couple of weeks, where you've seen such of a quote unquote rotation happen. Those value names that had done very well during the beginning of the year have started to subside. They started to actually subside in the second quarter, but it's really become prominent within the third quarter within there. So you're looking at it domestically. We're getting ready to head into, let's say, you've essentially gotten all your returns for the year. We're trying to take off risk from the portfolios as much as possible. So you'll notice during the recent distribution that we did, we actually took a little bit from large cap, and we also took some from small caps, because we want to make sure we look at small caps and saying, as the period we're going into now, we've ended a quote unquote recovery period. We're now in that phase where it's actually more of, okay, well, what they consider that mature type of market change. So we want to make sure that the portfolio is well balanced. You will see a lot more volatility. There hasn't really been any real volatility within the market over the past couple months. Even year to date, you'll notice that volatility has been very low and hasn't been a true indicator of success. But as that volatility kicks up, as you start seeing people actually are starting to switch their asset allocations, you will see that pop up within the returns going forward. In regards to inflation, I've been on here, a couple times talking about inflation. I think the biggest thing, I've always kind of tried to make sure I let you guys know and be transparent about is the fact that the word transitory does not mean it's going to end in a couple months. You're seeing that now, even with the inflation coming down. You're seeing cars come down. You're seeing travel also come down and restaurant and lodging come down. But, we're here in the city of Philadelphia. You also know that housing prices have increased. That does have a lagging indicator when it goes into the CPI calculation and it rolls up into that rent portion. So if you're also seeing housing increase, you'll notice that rents are starting to increase at a rate of close to 10% for those that are signing new leases. So that will pop up in the data. Also, you're noticing that, the wage portion has started to increase within there. Why? Because you have a lot of jobs out there. You have less people available. You've had a lot of people retired. You had a lot of people leave the workforce. The argument about the unemployment benefits, whether it was helping or hindering. Here's the one thing about that. On the labor side, you might have had some people that were out, but you probably had some people that truly needed it because they haven't been able to quote unquote go back to their job even if they wanted to, or if they could, they didn't want to because of the fact that they could contract the virus and they were highly susceptible to it. So you did have a lot of that going on. The states that actually ended unemployment earlier versus the states that didn't end unemployment, you're not seeing any statistical difference between the two within the unemployment drop. So essentially, within employers are fighting for employees in a sense. So how are they doing that? They have to increase wages in order to pull people in. What does that do? To ultimately increase the price. You also have supply playing in there, the supply disruptions, which I've talked about in the past. They're here, they're still going to be here. How does that relate to inflation? Those three things play out into inflation going forward. You'll definitely see heightened inflation, even though it says 2.5%. If you look at the Fed dot charts, the expectation to see high inflation going out again for the next 18 months, probably even 24 months. The biggest thing is you have to get a couple things under control. You have to get your supply chains working properly. You have to get your labor back in quote unquote equilibrium. If the supply chains aren't back in equilibrium, then labor won't be back in equilibrium. Until that happens, you'll still see inflation pop up, and you'll still see higher inflation than we have seen in the past, which was essentially a lot lower. Does that answer your question, Don?
It does. It does. Any concern? Last question. Any concern about the virus and its impact on the economy?
Yes. So so here's the interesting thing. Like when you think about the recent action which Biden has done, which was essentially to kind of basically say, if you're a federal employee, you have to get this vaccine. Why? And I think that, because a lot of things, and even I think, for every question, it's not so much the who or the what, it's the why that matters the most. The why, because if I can get more people vaccinated, I can get more people into work. I can hopefully keep the schools open, hopefully be able to keep everything running so that the economy can do what? Continue to expand. Otherwise, you'll have the situation you have now, which people are cutting GDP growth estimates going forward because the slowdown, because of the variant. So getting the variant under control is one of the biggest things. You'll notice there has been a lot of pushback in regards to the way it was. If you think about this recent case, how it was really rolled out in a sense, it was a lot more forceful, and unfortunately, people have not felt the need. You have some population that doesn't want to get it, others that are just totally against getting it. And you're looking at our economy and kind of saying like, well, if we don't have a good amount of people that have it, then have the vaccine or are vaccinated, so that we can stop overloading our hospitals, then we'll consistently be going through this turmoil for the next couple months, which again will impact everything we're dealing with. And take it for a person who was literally right before this call at UPenn. They have more they have more COVID beds available, and they have people that go in there almost every day.
All right. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Are there any other questions? Christopher, I think we've addressed all of the items on the agenda. Is that correct?
Yeah, not for anything on the agenda, but if it would be possible just for Don, for you, Kellen, Nick, Fran to stick around for 2 minutes after the meeting, not to cover anything on the agenda, but just for some ministerial discussion, that would be helpful. Shouldn't take more than a couple minutes.
You got it. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
I'll make a motion to close the meeting.
Second.
So moved. Second, so moved.
So,
Just need to take the vote, Don.
All those in favor of closing the meeting down, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The ayes have it. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
You're welcome.